This is George Dionne of the Rock is George podcast, and this is a KNAC.com exclusive interview with frontman Michael Sweet of the Christian hard rock act Stryper. If I knew absolutely nothing about Stryper, how would you describe the band's music to me?
Oh boy, it's a mix of metal and melody. I mean, a lot of metal doesn't have as much melody. It's not as melodic as something like Journey or Loverboy or whatnot. And I think we've kind of merged the two because we loved Loverboy as much as we did Priest. And definitely very unique sound with the twin harmonies and the vocals and the lyrical content obviously makes us very different. So I'm not really sure how I would describe it other than it's very unique and eclectic and interesting, to say the least.
I've been listening to your latest album, When We Were Kings. It comes out on September 13th through Frontiers Music. I feel like that this album is a love letter to Stryper's 40 years of history and their fans. Am I close?
Yeah, it is. I mean, this album was written with the thought, the back corner of the mind thought that this could be our last album. It's very possible. I hope it's not. And, I hope we have the opportunity to make many more, but, you never know. And there's been a lot of things going on health wise within the band. And we're getting older. We're not Rolling Stones old. And they're still going, but we're getting older. And, there comes a time in life where you do start to consider retirement and, kind of putting an end to everything and closing the doors. But hopefully that won't be the case soon, but it could be. And I think that was the thought process behind the album when it was being written and recorded.
Let's talk about the album's title track, When We Were Kings. You got an accompanying music video that kind of chronicles the band's early days. I knew exactly when I heard this song what it was about. So it keeps up with that, kind of keeps in line with that 40th anniversary.
For sure. I mean, we talk about the good old days, reminisce about all that stuff. And there was a time, I think some people forget, especially the haters, that Stryper was an arena headlining band for quite some time. And we did very well and had gold and platinum albums and were very successful. Still are, just in a different way, trying to survive in today's music world, being a band from the 80s, it's hard. You got to be very creative and you got to stay active and you have to stay busy and be willing to work really hard, harder than most. And we still do, but we had some great golden years, and that's what the song When We Were Kings talks about. We're reminiscing about the past and all those amazing times that we had.
On the flip side, from reminiscing about the past, the opening track is a single that you released, End of Days. I feel like when you turn on the TV or you look at social media that we're living in end of days. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you make a statement like that, there are the naysayers that are going to think you're a kook and you've lost your mind. Not really sure where their minds are at, to be honest with you. Obviously not on the news whatsoever, because it's all around us. I have that image of the Russian jet and the Chinese jet over U.S. skies. And I'm just thinking that was the first. Okay, what does that mean? And it's like all these things that make you wonder, like, are we living in the end of days? I think we could be, it's certainly a lot scarier, the times we live in. Everybody has a lot more power. Everyone has a lot more manpower in terms of their size of their, the Chinese army is insane. The size of the Chinese army, and these people who lead these countries are obviously of a different mentality than we are. So it's kind of scary. it's when you think about it, it's a little frightening to think about. We do live in a world that's so volatile, and at any given moment, anything could happen. And I know it's been like that for a long time, but what's even scarier, not to ramble on, is just the fact that everybody has nuclear power, and we've got North Korea firing test missiles constantly and threatening to do this and to do that. It's just the weird times that we're living in, man. Very. So end of days, I think we're closer to that. Yes. Kooky Michael Sweet, he's crazy. He's lost his mind.
You're right about what you see around you. And I think on tying that in, I mean, it's not all a negative message on this album for sure.
Yeah.
You have a single out called Grateful, and it's about, counting your blessings and finding the positive and in your life around you, correct?
100%. And that's the wonderful thing about what Stryper sings about is the message of Christ. And with Christ, there's hope. With Christ, there's eternity. With Christ, there's a future. It's not the end of days. It may be at some point in time on this planet Earth, but in eternity, it will never be. So that's something Stryper believes, and that's what we sing about, and that's what we believe in, and that's where we put our faith, and that's the way it's always been since 1983. So there's nothing new there, and I think everybody knows that. And we've always stood our ground with that and wanted to make sure that we don't waver from the most important part of who we are, which is the message.
Absolutely. And the message rings throughout the album. And of course, along with your faith, love is a big theme within Stryper's music. You have a great ballad here, a little on the heavier side of balladry, but Love Symphony. If you want to tell me a little bit about that song.
Yeah, Love Symphony. I mean, I didn't even look at that as a ballad, but I guess it could be considered a ballad. It's got some metal elements to it, some modern elements, and classic. There's a lot of harmonies and guitar, vocals, different sections, rhythm changes, a lot going on. But it's very classic. The chorus, especially, is very classic Stryper. It definitely takes you back to 1986 or 7 or 8. Has that vibe to it. And, we don't want to walk away from who we are. A lot of people say, why don't you try something different? Why don't you become a thrash band or whatever? And it's like, why in the world would we do that? That's just silliness. That's like saying to Megadeth, why don't you become a pop band? It's like, it makes no sense. We're Stryper, and we have our own unique sound, love it or hate it. And we'll keep doing that. But we'll also keep trying to add just little bits and pieces of the times we're living in, musically and lyrically. That's important to try to stay somewhat relevant and speak of the times that we're in and have some production, musically speaking, that people can relate to, younger generations can relate to as well.
When We Are Kings is going to be available streaming and physical formats, CD, vinyl. Vinyl is kind of like the hottest thing right now in music consumption, especially for older guys like me. Stryper always has some cool vinyls when it comes to their releases, and When We Are Kings is no different. You have so many different color vinyls spread out through so many different shops. You get something at Frontiers, you get something at your store, and you got something at Girder Music.
100%. And it's what Stryper does is we make certain that we have different mixes for vinyl. We have different mixes for the format, and certainly different master. Everything. You can't just take the digital or the CD master and send that to the vinyl plant, because it's going to be too loud and it's not going to sound good. It's going to be muddy and just sound like crap. So we go the extra mile to make sure that everything is mastered and mixed properly according to which format. And then also, it's very important. Like, we released an acoustic album. We did an Atmos mix on that, something that we've never done before. And we really want to make sure that we're staying up on everything. sonically, everything that we do, that it's the highest quality you could imagine. And that goes for the documentary we're working on too. When that comes out, that'll be the highest quality you can see it or view it in. And we're excited about that. So Stryper's about quality. We always have been. We want, that first impression with every album is everything. And we don't want anyone to hear anything that's Stryper related and say, that could have been better. We try to make it the best, always.
You have the 40th anniversary tour coming up in September. It runs through November for now. And
Yep.
it's a celebration of the hits and classic songs and new era favorites. You're actually going to do a little bit of a production for this one, correct?
We are. What we're doing is we're going to go out and do a classic set, and with clothing that resembles the past to some degree. And then we're going to have an intermission and then come out and do a modern set. When I say modern, I mean from like '05 on. The first official album we released, Reborn, and our second go around. And we're going to do a modern set with a little bit more of a modern look, change our guitars. So we'll have some video walls displaying lots of cool images, artwork, photos, video, a lot of stuff people haven't seen, some really cool stuff. So that'll be a part of the show. It's going to be really killer, man. It's bang for the buck. It'll be outstanding.
Now, you mentioned earlier when you went into recording the album When We Were Kings, that it was possibly, or at least in your mind, could possibly be the final Stryper album. Is this 40th anniversary tour possibly your final?
It's a good question. I'll be honest and say that we've talked about it within the camp. And I don't mean that we've gone as far as to say, let's retire on this date. Nothing like that. But definitely my wife co-manages the band. So here in the Sweet household, Michael Sweet household, it's 24/7 Stryper. You don't get a break. Even when we go to dinner, which isn't until 9:00 at night, we walk into our local restaurant or restaurants, and they keep the kitchen open for us for 5 more minutes. So we eat, because we eat late all the time. Or Lisa's making dinner at 10:00 or what have you. That's because we work all day on Stryper stuff. And then we sit around and we eat and talk about Stryper stuff and then make phone calls, and we're texting, and it's just 24/7 Stryper. And I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just saying it's nonstop. And it would be nice. The thought of retiring that and taking a break sounds so good. Oh my gosh. It sounds like a dream. But, if we're supposed to keep doing this, then that's not the reality of it. And we'll keep doing this. And I'm 61 now. I'd love to maybe not be touring as much by the time I'm 70. That would be pretty awesome. But we'll see. Who knows? I may be one of those guys who is still breathing and touring when I'm 85 years old. I really hope not, but it could happen.
You mentioned the Stryper documentary. You guys had a Kickstarter campaign to help fund the documentary. How far along are you in the production?
Well, it took forever for us to find a team. That's what took months and prolonged and postponed and slowed things down a bit. We finally found a team, and once we did, we started really filming a lot of stuff. We've got a ton of interview footage, a lot of footage with the band, a lot of historical footage and whatnot. I would say we'll probably be done shooting going into next year, and we'll start the editing process sometime next year. It probably won't see a release until 25.
Okay. Is it going to chronicle the history of the band, or is it going to start at a certain point and go from there?
I'm not sure of. It will have obviously a lot of history of the band within the documentary. But the approach is, when you watch a documentary, just watched a Bon Jovi documentary, and it was a lot of John talking and more of John talking. And more of John talking, more of John talking. And kind of like the whole documentary was, a lot of John talking, and that's fine. It's Bon Jovi. He's John Bon Jovi. It's his band. He is the guy. But I don't want our documentary to be anything like that. In other words, I don't want it to be just the 4 band members sitting around talking for 2 hours. To me, that's boring. You've already heard all these stories. You've already heard us talk a gazillion times. What's more important to me is, from a fan's perspective, interviewing someone whose life was altered because of Stryper, because of the music. To me, that's more interesting. That's more powerful than anything we could ever say. There will be footage of us in it, of course, and footage of the band and all that stuff. But there's also going to be a lot of interviews with people that you might not expect to be a Stryper fan. A lot of people some people you may not know, and how Stryper had an impact on their lives, negatively or positively.
So, in keeping with the 40th anniversary and sort of the documentary going into Stryper's career, let's hit the time machine and go back to July 1984 for the Yellow and Black Attack EP. Must have been a tough sell in 84 for sort of this Christianity message in heavy metal music. Why don't you tell me a little bit about kind of facing that obstacle?
Well, to be completely transparent, we didn't even think about that. We didn't care. We just, we rededicated our lives. Some friends of ours walked in and they had committed their lives to Christ. Friends that you would never even imagine would ever do that while on the planet Earth. And they did, and we saw a change in them. And it blew us away so much that it had an impact on us. And we kind of grew up knowing about God and having gone to church briefly, and we decided to rededicate our lives. I kind of took the bull by the horns on that and said, this is what I want to do. And then my brother followed suit. And then eventually Oz followed suit, and Tim. And I just started rewriting all the lyrics. I just woke up one morning, sat there at the table, and started rewriting all the lyrics. And that I'd walk in and say, here's the new lyrics. And we'd all look at it and be like, okay, I guess we're doing this. And we didn't really talk about, gosh, I wonder how hard this is going to be. Are we going to have trouble getting airplay? Are we going to have trouble reaching people? Are we going to have trouble getting MTV to play our videos? We didn't talk about any of that. We just did it. Changed out the lyrics and just went for it. Started tossing out Bibles, started, singing about Jesus. And the rest is history. And we never sat down and had any meetings about, how do we sell this? Eventually we started meeting with the label about how to build the band and the brand. We did all that stuff and still do to this day, but we never really thought about how are we going to do this? We just did it.
Is it true that the album was recorded twice?
You talking about the Yellow and Black Attack?
Yes.
Well, not entirely. What we did is we recorded the album originally at Mad Dog Studio in LA. And I think we tracked drums at Music Grinder, I believe, and then it wound up doing everything else at Mad Dog. But the first album was my favorite. It was very raw and dry and in your face. And then we got this harebrained idea to remix it. So we remixed it and then added 2 songs to it. It went from a 6-song to an 8-song. So we didn't re-record that stuff. And I can't listen to that remix album at all. It's swimming in reverb and delay, and it lost all of its rawness and all of its power. I can't do it. Can't listen to it.
Do you remember some of the bands that you toured with after the EP was released?
Oh, yeah. We did a lot of local shows with a number of bands. I mean, oddly enough, Bon Jovi. We did a show. I think you see the marquee in his documentary at the country club. We performed with Autograph. We performed with Zebra. We performed with all the local bands of the time. And then once we started touring, we were able to establish ourselves as a headlining act. And that's when we had a lot of other bands opening for us, like TNT, Loudness, White Lion, Hurricane, and just a list that goes on and on of bands that opened for us while we were touring during that time.
So, as a Christian heavy metal act for 40 years, do you get a lot of fans that ask your advice on faith and the Bible and Jesus and God?
100%. A lot of fans and a lot of friends, a lot of peers, other bands. Yeah, of course. But it's always about the right moment. We don't go into a room like if there's a room of we just played with Priest and Behemoth and Merciful Fate. We didn't kick open any dressing room doors and say, "Hey, let's talk about Jesus right now." We don't do that. That's not how we do things. But if the opportunity arises, or in conversation, someone asks a question or they want to know something, we'll of course talk to them about it. But we're never forceful about it. I had a conversation with the singer for Merciful Fate. I'm trying to think his first name. What is his first name? Help me out. Is it Kim? Kim. Yeah. And he and I were talking, and we were just talking about the weather, and just life. It was just a regular conversation, and we didn't talk about God or Satan. We just talked about life, and I think some people have this preconceived idea that Stryper's going to come in and ruin the party, and they pull out a Bible and start preaching to you, and it's not like that at all.
I think a lot of people have preconceived ideas of, faith in general, and that, what they read and hear in social media, they automatically believe, but you could tell sometimes when they speak, they have no idea.
I know. Well, that's the world we live in. I mean, we open up our phones the minute we get out of bed and we see a headline or we see a story, and without even reading it, we just see the headline and go, "Oh my God, look at this. Can you believe this? Look at what so-and-so said." And then you read the article and it's like, well, that's not exactly what they said. It was a little different than that. We don't take the time to check the facts. And that applies politically as well. We don't look into things. We don't look at the history. We don't look at the policies. We don't read the facts, and we just kind of blindly say, "Hey, I'm voting for that person because I like their personality and I don't like that personality. So I'm gonna vote for that person." And we don't really know what's going on. I think we just do that, and I think the internet has fueled that fire and made that far worse than it's ever been.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier getting older, having some issues. I think it's been documented that you've had some problems with your eyes and your thyroid. How are you doing from a medical standpoint?
Well, it's really weird. I mean, everybody's different. When my eyes detached, I heard from Todd Kearns, who also had retinal detachments, and Paul Gargano, Metal Edge, also had retinal detachments. And they're doing good. Well, I know Todd is. Todd's doing pretty good, and I think can see fairly well. It really affected me. I think because I had my repair surgery done at the end of my cycle. You had like a 10-day window. I had my surgery on day 10. So there was a lot of scar tissue, and so my case is much more severe. And then it redetached because of that scar tissue, so it got even worse. So my vision in this eye is, I'm legally blind in this eye. I can't hardly see out of this eye. This eye is doing okay. It's got some tears, but if that eye were to ever go, I'd be probably in a little bit of trouble. And it does affect me. I don't know why, but when I play, you would think this eye would be the most important eye, but oddly enough, it's this eye. I use this eye to not only look here, but to look down here. And the fact that it doesn't work properly has just caused me to have to reevaluate how I play. I'm having a lot more trouble than I thought. Yeah. So, but I mean, here's the deal. I can see, and I'm still here performing, and I'm still doing what I love to do. So I'm not going to complain. It could be far worse. It always can be. If I had my eyes removed or something happened like that, where I literally couldn't see at all, it could always be worse. And I'm very grateful for what I have.
As we're running out of time, I'll kind of blast out these last few questions really quick. Is there going to be a follow up to Soul Driver Return Me to Light that you did with Alessandro Del Vecchio?
I sure hope so. I love Alessandro. I think he's a really incredible talent. And what I loved about that album in particular and that project is I said, Alessandro, why don't you write the music? Let's do something different. And I'll write the melodies in the lyrics. And he wrote the music and sent it to me, and it made it really different. It wasn't typical Stryper sounding or Michael Sweet sounding. It had a very different sound. And I love that about that project. And it was an honor working with Alessandro. I think he's brilliant. And I hope there's a follow up. I do. I'll tell you what, the only way I would do a follow up on that is if it was with Alessandro. I mean, Alessandro brought a lot to the table with that project. So I couldn't see myself doing it with anyone other than him. That would kind of make no sense to me.
From what I understand, there is going to be a follow up to Iconic's Second Skin album that you did with Nathan James, Joel Hoekstra, Marco Mendoza, and Tommy Aldridge. When can we expect that one?
Well, that got put on a shelf. There was a parting of ways between Frontiers and Alessandro was working with me on that. I sent in all the music, and then now Aldo, who works for Frontiers, who's also brilliant, fantastic producer and writer. He's been kind of reworking things, and they've taken some time to do that. So it's caused there a delay, a little bit longer than expected. But it's sounding great. It's going to be amazing. And I would say you could probably expect a release on that definitely next year, not this year. But I would think it would wrap up this year, I would say.
And is there another Sweet and Lynch album for you in the future?
Dear God, I hope not.
Do we want to keep it at that, or is there an explanation?
Man, I love George to death. I really do. George is really surprised me in the best of ways. Meaning, George has a sense of humor that not everyone understands. And now that I've gotten to know him, I absolutely love it. I think it's brilliant. And I love his sense of humor. And as a guitar player, he's one of my top 5 guitar players of all time. And I think he's a great person. I think George has a big heart, and I think he's just a wonderful human being. Obviously, we don't see eye to eye spiritually. I'm a believer in Christ, and George was at one time, but he's now a free thinker / atheist, and that's his choice. I have nothing bad to say about that. But what I was going to say about I hope not, I'm semi joking, but what I mean by that is I if we do another project, I would like to do it right. And what I mean by that is I produced the first 2 albums. And to me, that's the way Sweet and Lynch should sound, especially the first album. That was the strongest album. And that had a very particular sound to it that was very cool, kind of a merging of Stryper and Dawkins and then some. This last album was really good too, but it was just a little bit more experimental, and it didn't have the fire that the first album had. So if we can get back on track and agree to do it a certain way, and the funds are there to cover that, I'm in. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes, and I hope we go tour and do some shows. That really breaks my heart that we don't do any shows. These 3 albums out and we haven't performed once together. It's like, come on now, that's stupid.
There's certainly an audience for it, I'm sure.
There's, I think, a big audience for it. I think a lot of people, surprisingly enough, I think everyone would be shocked at how many people would turn out to see Sweet and Lynch tour. If George and I announce tomorrow we're going to tour next year, I think tickets would do very well and people would want to see that because it's different, it's unique, and unexpected.
Exactly. Well, Michael, those are all the questions I have for you today. The new Stryper album, When We Were Kings, comes out September 13th through Frontiers Music. Fantastic album. I wish you the best of luck with it, and thanks for speaking with KNAC.com.
Thank you, George. Great job as usual, and thanks for having me.